they both have 4 kids, which is so neat to meet another fellow mom, and just to hear her passion for the men and women that she serves, her passion for her staff, and you're going to get to hear some of that heart today. She truly feels called by God for this work. And I got to hear some of that, and I knew that we needed to hear more tonight. And you're going to really be able to learn more about the important work of rest and how they are rescuing and restoring, transforming lives. And then just know more about this issue here in King County and Washington State, and really have our eyes opened to the realities of what's going on around us. So I would like to welcome Lisa Odell, and thank you for coming and giving us your time.
I wasn't expecting that much about me. Can you all hear me okay, or do you want me to use the microphone?
Use the microphone.
Okay, I will try to use the microphone. Not one of my high skill sets, but I will give it a shot. So yeah, I wasn't planning on talking about this, but I'm just going to jump on that statistic that Camille just mentioned about foster care. One of the myths, I'll say, about sex trafficking, and you'll hear me even, our language is so gendered and our habits are so strong that you'll hear me say her when I talk about clients, and you'll often hear me say him when I talk about buyers or pimps. But that is because not much research has been done as far as numbers go. And the research that has been done is pretty old. And if you look up statistics, they will say that the vast majority of victims of sex trafficking are women. So that's how we tend to think. However, when people have gone into foster care settings and they have asked the children there, have you ever had to trade sex for something of value? It is an equal number of boys that says yes to girls. So when you hear me use that gendered language, know that it's habit, it's not truth. And when you're talking about it with people, let them know that this is an issue that affects all ages, all genders, all races. It affects vulnerable people, period. So I was going to introduce myself before I got into that. I get sidetracked easily. You'll have to forgive me. So thank you for having me here today. Like Camille said, I'm Lisa. I work with REST, which stands for Real Escape from the Sex Trade. Learn how to work my computer here with this screen. We are an anti-trafficking organization in Seattle. We serve all of King County. We have a lot of services that reach across Washington, and we have some services that reach across the United States. My job at REST is threefold. One is to raise awareness, to let people know that sex trafficking is not an over there thing. It's a right here in Seattle, in our backyard, possibly even in your front yard kind of thing. Another one of my jobs is to raise money, because it is a necessary evil. We can't do what we do without the funding to do it. And then my third job is that I volunteer on our street outreach team, because that's really where my heart is. I'm probably one of the very few people you'll ever meet who can truly say that standing on Aurora at 2 a.m. is one of my favorite places to be. Don't judge me. The thing is, we need to let people know on Aurora that there is somebody in the world who cares about them. Because a lot of them have never experienced someone who truly cares. They've only experienced people who say they care. So, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for wanting to learn more about sex trafficking. I realize this is a very uncomfortable topic. it's very possible that you will have emotions or even physical reactions that you're not expecting while we talk. So I'm going to ask you to just pay attention to your body. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself. If you need to step out for a minute, step out. I'm not going to be offended. If you want to get up and get something to drink, like Camille said, get up and get a drink, a snack, relax your shoulders, take deep breaths, whatever it is that you need to do. I plan to talk for about 40 minutes. I really prefer discussion over lecture, so I'm going to leave about half of the time for you guys to talk and ask questions. So be thinking of questions as we go. I mean, I could talk all night, but you would probably rather I didn't. So I really am hoping that we'll have a good discussion when this is over. All right. One of the things that I want to make sure that you guys walk away with tonight is the fact that not only is this an emotional issue, a desperate issue, a tragic issue, but there's also hope in it because God is in this story, and God's the most important part of this story. So whatever it is that I say tonight, know that first and foremost. All right, let's start here. I'm going to play a video that is a visual representation of a poem that was written by a survivor. As you watch this, I want to, one, remind you to keep in mind that it does impact all genders, all ages, all races. Two, one thing that I think is pertinent to know when you watch this is that pimps brand their merchandise, usually through tattoos. Sometimes it's other types of brands like scars, but tattoos are the primary way that they brand their merchandise. So with that in mind, let's hope I can get it to play. You guys see that little arrow right there, right? It's really a good video, y'all. I know, isn't it fun? I just tried it. We played it a minute ago. Of course. You guys, okay. Thank you, God.
She was 4 years old the first time a man looked at her the way a man looks at his wife on their wedding day. Little girls are supposed to dream about being models and doctors and veterinarians. Instead, she fell asleep eyes wide with terror of another night greeted by her stepfather's shadow. He was a real monster in her bedroom, and Mom, she was too fragile, too selfish to accept the truth that her little girl's innocence had been stolen one night when her boyfriend decided she wasn't good enough anymore. And since the little girl never had a real father, she accepted his advances because he always promised her his touches were acceptable, because he loved her. When you don't know yourself and you don't love yourself, you will fall for anything that sounds like love and feels like love. She was a walking corpse, stained with the fingerprints of strangers. And all she wanted was to walk the earth without the heaviness, the weight of all the men who tore a piece of her and took it with them. She never made it to see her 18th birthday. This is for the pain, for the stains that bath water won't wash away, for the scars on the hearts of the fatherless child. This is for the girls objectified instead of praised like queens. This is for the agony, growing up without a father, but all you really want is love, and you don't understand love. So one day when some guy stops you in a train station or a street corner and tells you you're beautiful, You are quickly intrigued. You like the fact that someone notices you, and you will do anything to feel like he's everything, and he promises you everything, and the things he convinces you to do, they don't seem that bad if afterwards he shows you how much he loves you. Your morals are abandoned on that sidewalk where you turned your first trick. Your beauty is left in that hotel room where some stranger touched you like his girlfriend and then left the money on the nightstand. And every night, you die again, compromising your worth for what your pimp calls love and security. The hustle, the streetlights, the schemes, it never seems worth it, but you have the liquor to comfort your fears, and as long as your profits meet expectations, you will have what you always wanted your whole life. Love. Love that doesn't feel right, but it's all you think you're worth, so you take it every day. You sleep when the sun comes up, rise when the sun is down. Conceal the torment with makeup and stylish hairdos. Put on your best outfits, something arousing because you have to make them happy. The men, the tricks, the pimps. This is for the pain. This is for America. In hopes that you will notice that 12-year-old girl who was forced to trade her lunchbox and sneakers for a Chanel purse and pumps. This is for the 16-year-old girl kidnapped by a gang of men on her way to school and held captive in a house right next door to you. This is for the 20-year-old girl who took her last beating today because she couldn't bring herself to let another man hold her down and violate her. We are all slaves for love, degrading ourselves for acceptance of a man that's the closest thing to a father figure we've ever known. We were once just girls with aspirations and a small piece of hope. Now who will notice us? Who will save America's daughters?
Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Do you see why the name REST was chosen by our founders before they even realized that it created an acronym for Real Escape from the Sex Trade? Can't you feel the heart and the weight of that statement? The peace, the hope. We had somebody break into one of our facilities recently. It's located in South Seattle. We realize it's not the best neighborhood around. That's purposeful, but we are working on upping our security. But she was able to get in during the night. She didn't steal anything. She didn't do any damage. She didn't even take food. When we found her in the morning, all she wanted was a safe place to get away from her pimp and sleep. So what is sex trafficking? Well, the legal definition of commercial sexual exploitation tells us that sex trafficking is any commercial sexual act that happens under the umbrella of force, fraud, or coercion, or that happens with a minor. It is the fastest growing criminal enterprise today. It is the third largest in the world, just behind illegal drugs and arms trafficking. And it makes sense that it's growing faster than those because when you think about it, drugs and guns, you can only sell once before they belong to somebody else to make money off of or use. But people, you can sell again and again and again. Statistics show that on average, somebody who's involved in the sex trade has a lifespan of 7 years before they die from murder, disease, or suicide. So, when you think about a victim being sold for 7 years to an average of 4,000 men a year, you can see why it is a $150 billion industry. Larger than the combined profits of all of the tech companies in Seattle. That's saying something. What about in King County? Well, We know of thousands of people a night being sold for sex in King County, and 500 to 700 of those are youth. The average age of first victimization is 14.4 years old. Okay, those numbers are from a study that was done in 2019. There hasn't been much done since then, but Polaris did a study of the National Trafficking Hotline at the beginning of the pandemic, and they found that in the first month of the pandemic, the number of crisis calls to the hotline, crisis being defined as something that needed immediate attention, such as law enforcement, healthcare, shelter within 24 hours, went up by 40%. And the average age of first victimization went down to 12. And tragically at Rest, we have clients who know they were as young as 2 years old when they were sold, or can't remember a time in life when they were not being sold for sex. It's a criminal enterprise, right? We don't know the real numbers. I'm just telling you the numbers that we know. And what about buyers? Well, again, to the numbers that we know, there are about 130,000 buyers of sex in the city of Seattle. About half of those are regular repeat buyers. About half only buy once a year. There are not enough willing participants in the sex trade to meet the demand. So this creates an economic opportunity, right, for traffickers to recruit and require people who don't want to sell sex for money. And then the money goes straight into the hands of the trafficker, not into the hands of the victim. Traffickers most often use psychological coercion, romance, promises of a better life, something that looks like love, sometimes force, to get somebody to start selling sex. And then they deploy punishments, threats, violence to keep them selling sex. So what this means is that the majority of sex buyers are purchasing sex from people who are trafficked, not people who are there as willing participants. So numbers are a great measure. They're easy to look at. But the numbers are not the point. The people are the point. So let's talk about the people. Let's talk about that teenage boy who bounced from home to home in foster care, who's lured by a friend who seems to care about him, maybe for the very first time in his life. And that friend then gives him drugs and sells his body to somebody else for profit. Or let's talk about the 10-year-old girl who first sold sex because her parents were using all of their money on drugs and alcohol. And they had convinced her that CPS and schools were the enemy, and so she couldn't tell anybody. But she couldn't watch her little sister starve. So when her next door neighbor offered her $100 for sex, she took it. Or how about the 19-year-old who's been living on the street for a lot of years and she finds herself pregnant. And she comes to us looking for the first time for help because she wants to find a way to protect her baby from her pimp. Or what about the woman who tries to leave her trafficker, gets caught, has all of her teeth knocked out in the ensuing beating, and she just feels happy to be alive? That's what commercial sexual exploitation looks like. In 2020, of the known victims of trafficking in Washington that shared their age, only 64% of them were adults. 89% of them had first been trafficked in the sex trade when they were children. And once somebody enters the sex trade in this way, it's not long before they believe that they're stuck, that no one cares, or that there's no way out. And in many places across the US, they're right. Just like at one point in Seattle, they were right. That's how Rest was founded about 12 years ago, when 3 women were walking the streets in Seattle. And they were seeing all these people on the streets. And they went back to their church and they said, okay, you guys, we need to do something. And their church said, you know what, there are resources out there. They just don't want to access them. So these 3 women said, okay, well, maybe it's harder than it sounds. Let's help them access them. So they started trying to plug these women into the resources that existed in Seattle, only to be told that they weren't welcome. Their compound trauma was too large for the existing facilities to handle. They weren't helpable. They weren't worth the effort. But those 3 women were driven by the belief that everyone is worthy of love and everyone deserves a life free of exploitation. And so even though they ran into roadblock after roadblock to try to get these victims into services, they decided that somebody had to create resources that were specifically designed for victims of extreme sexual trauma and had their unique needs in mind. So 12 years ago, Rest was literally these 3 women working out of their church basement. Today, we are likely the largest nonprofit of our kind by caseload in the country. Yay, God. Is it enough? No. Those 600 to 700 people a year that Rest is serving, that's about 20% of the people who need it in Seattle, who are trying to access it. So there's still a lot to do here. And that's what we're going to try to do. So, where is God in all this? I'm so glad you asked. Let me tell you. He is in you. He's calling you to bring peace to this world. He's calling you to love those who have not ever known love. He's calling you to care for those who are fighting for their lives, fighting for survival, fighting for a place to sleep at night, for the freedom to choose for themselves what they want to wear at any given time of the day or night. He's calling for you to fight for a community in which people are more important than profit. When I was 13, I went on a week-long school trip, and we all just adored this teacher who took us. He was an amazing teacher. He won awards every year for what a great teacher he was. He showered us with attention, and he had us convinced that those who were chosen to go into this room with him were the special ones. And we all want to be chosen, right? We all think we want to be chosen. Toward the end of the week, we went to this new volcanic island. It was so new that it was still hot enough to the touch that you had to wear thick-soled shoes to walk across it. And even then, you could feel the heat coming up through your shoes. And so, as we're walking across this island, I saw this crack that had a tiny little green sprout growing out of it. I don't know what kind of seed had blown across the water and taken root there. I have no idea what plant it became. But I know that I stood there and stared at it for a long time. And it rocked my world. Because right before that, I had learned Isaiah 61:3. And all I could hear in my head was that God gives beauty for ashes. And you guys, he really does. As hard as it is to hear and see what our clients go through, there are also beautiful stories of hope and of healing. Stories of a woman who missed her entire education because she was trafficked at an early age, who's now getting an education and a job. Or a man who was trafficked here from an island in Alaska who's now getting his pilot's license, which was his dream as a child. Or a family getting the legal help they need to be reunited and to press charges against their trafficker. Survivors who have been through this journey, who are using their voices and their experiences to help others who are fighting for their lives in this moment. There are stories of hope, reunification, recovery, redemption. Shame is a hard thing to live with. It keeps you stuck. It keeps you blinded. But unreserved acceptance and welcome are a beautiful antidote for shame. We had a client call Rest recently who first engaged with us about 8 years ago. She just called out of the blue because she wanted to share with her advocate, who's still at Rest, that she had just begun working on her second master's degree. I know, right? And she wanted to share her story. She wanted to be able to use it to encourage others who are just starting their journey. She wanted to know that her pain would help other people. But getting up in front of people and telling your story is freaking scary when you've been through something like that, right? So she wasn't quite ready for that yet. So instead, we helped her make a video. So I want to share that video with you guys tonight as a celebration of the joy and the beauty that God has brought through her. So you'll hear her voice on the video. The face is an actress who also actually comes from a similar background.
Every day in our beautiful city of Seattle, human beings are trafficked. Many are hiding in plain sight. I know this because I lived it. I was raised in Seattle. As a child, I played soccer and sang in the parish choir. I laughed, was kind, and loved anything that was pink and sparkly. As I began kindergarten, my father was at the height of his alcoholism with no way to fund his addiction. One morning, he stopped me from going to school and took me across town. When we arrived at an unfamiliar apartment, a stranger answered the door, and my father told me to do whatever I was told to do. My father received cash from the man and walked out the door. I spent 5 hours in that apartment, during which I was brutalized. At one point, my father came back to participate in the sexual atrocities. This happened again for years, sometimes as frequent as twice a week. Even as these unimaginable acts took place, I was still the child I described. I became really good at masking my horrific reality. I was a child victim of sex trafficking, hiding in plain sight. When I was a high school senior, I left home, but the lack of affection and nurturing throughout my childhood left me vulnerable to anyone who showed care. I wanted more than anything to matter to someone. A new student transferred into my English class. He was charming, and he wanted to be my friend. Quickly, I became comfortable discussing my upbringing. He looked at me and said, "I can be like the father you never had. You will belong to me, and I will take care of you. For once, I felt seen, and there was hope for everything I wanted. Instead, I found myself in the same situation I was in when I was a child. I had already been conditioned to stay silent, obey men who told me what to do, and accept whatever was done to me. The thought that I could say no never even occurred to me. For 2 years, I was taken to unfamiliar places to be raped. Money was exchanged for hours of my pain and suffering. I was told daily that I was an object to be used. The crazy thing is, it didn't sound crazy at all. I had already been told this by my father. During those 2 years, I continued to mask my pain. I worked at Starbucks and was involved with my church. I had friends, and I laughed often. You would never think I was a victim of sex trafficking. The abuse became so overwhelming. I didn't know how, but I knew I needed to escape. I decided to move across the country. One friend stubbornly asked me questions about why. I finally described the situation I was in. With tears in her eyes, my friend said, "You are being trafficked." I didn't know what that meant, but I disagreed with her. Sitting in her car, she wrote down the rest hotline number and wouldn't let me leave until I agreed to call. When I called, an advocate invited me to meet with her. I quickly informed her I was moving, but she suggested we meet weekly until then. There was no reason for me to change my plans because in Seattle, I no longer had a place to live, a job, or savings to pull from. Still, I knew that staying meant having an opportunity to heal. After making the decision to stay, I was invited to move into the rest house. 8 years ago, the rest house was available to me when I needed a pathway to freedom. I didn't have to pay rent, I had a place to live, and could acknowledge what had happened to me. Rest made it possible for me, at 20 years old, to escape a life of sex trafficking. The journey of healing after years of being sexually exploited is extremely difficult. I often feel like I simultaneously operate in two worlds. The present day world, in which I am responsible for being a functional adult, and the trauma world, in which I daily carry the consequences of evil done against me, making everything 10 times harder. I continually struggle with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and disruptions in sleep. Despite the difficulties, I am here and I continue to heal. Since leaving the rest house, I have worked weekly through my trauma with a therapist who is incredible. I have close friends who walk alongside me, sharing my grief and celebrating my victories. I have earned a bachelor's degree and a master's. I am now working on my second master's degree in clinical mental health counseling with the goal of using my experiences of suffering to help others heal. When being sexually exploited, choices are not yours. There is little point to dream or plan for a better future because knowing the unlikelihood of that reality feels devastating. The only focus is just how to survive the day. With the help of the resources I received through Rest, I no longer just have to survive the day. I am not dreaming for a better future, I'm living and planning it. Now, I'm moving towards using my own experiences and education to help others in their healing journey.
Our mission is to expand pathways to freedom, safety, and hope in order to end sex trafficking. Our goal is to stand in the gap and offer a different story. A story that says you are not a commodity to be bought and sold for somebody else's gain. You are God's beloved, and what He wants for you is freedom. What He wants for you is a love like none you have ever known. Our job is to find the resources that survivors need and plug them into those resources. If a resource does not exist, then we will create it to make it happen. Our work is rooted in the core belief that everyone deserves to be loved and everyone deserves a life free from exploitation. And everything that we do is based on relationships, because the vast majority of the time it was a bad relationship that got you into that situation, and only a good relationship is going to bring recovery and healing. So, what do we offer at Rest that makes this possible? A lot. If a victim of sex trafficking needs a place to stay to get off the streets and breathe for a few days while they figure out where they are, who they are, and what they need to do next, we have an emergency shelter that they can stay at. If they need food, clothing, hygiene, safety supplies, we have a resource closet full of items donated by the community that they can access. If they need connection, supportive community with other survivors, we have support groups and people on staff with similar lived experience to talk to. If they need to get away from their trafficker in the next 20 minutes because he stepped out, we have the resources to make that happen. If they need to get off substances that they've used to cope with their trauma for the last however many years, we have support for that. If they need job readiness training and placement or support in keeping a job once they get it, we have an academy, an employment specialist, and we partner with organizations all over to Seattle to provide internships. If they need help getting into their first apartment with their own lease, we'll help them get there, and we'll help with rental assistance while they get their feet under them. If they need access to medical care with a professional who understands the trauma that they've been through and is willing to give the extra time needed to create those relationships, we can make that happen. If they want mental or emotional support, therapy, or just someone to talk to when they're feeling anxious and afraid, we have a 24/7 hotline, we have support groups, we have text support, we have advocates. If they just need someone to listen and talk and take a walk and remind them that they are worthy, that they belong, our staff does that all day long. In other words, we have designed this continuum of services that meets people where they're at and responds with effective, individualized support so that they can find healing in their mind, body, and spirit. They can take the time that they need to recover from trafficking and confidently build a life outside of the sex trade. And honestly, we're only able to do this because of people like you, because of our community coming alongside us and supporting us, investing time, energy, ideas, and money to make it possible for this to happen. We have great staff, and they have a lot of training and a lot of experience to make these things happen, but we can't do it alone. We can't do it without prayer, and we can't do it without funding. So I'll have to throw a pitch in because that's part of my job. So I am offering you guys the opportunity to walk alongside us, to stand with us, to watch God bring beauty from ashes. Because honestly, we need the help. Right now, half of our funding comes from state and federal grants. A lot of those were redirected to COVID when that hit. A quarter of it comes from events. I kind of took a hit in COVID too. And then a quarter of it comes from individual donations, which did great during COVID. And then the stock market kind of fell a little, and now that's not going quite so well either. So I am asking you, whatever you're able to invest, if you want to invest your voice, your energy, your support in the lives of 600 to 700 people a year so that we can grow that number outside of the 20% that we're now meeting, You'll be investing in REST as a strategic asset in the fight against sex trafficking. Not only are you providing care for victims and survivors, but as victims and survivors start to heal, they can use their voice to testify against their traffickers. They can use their voice to speak into policy and legislation. Because until they heal enough to be able to stand up, law enforcement can literally do nothing. This is one of those deals where fixing the systems of harm has to go hand in hand with treating the symptoms of harm. And not to brag, because it's all God, but this has a ripple effect across the US. Because right now, REST is being sought out weekly by organizations all over the US, asking for help and training to do what we do, because our program is so effective. So we've spent the last 12 years learning how to do it really well, and our focus of the next 12 years, in addition to continuing to do that, is to help other organizations across the US do it as well. Because what we're doing right now it's not enough. It's one small step. So where does REST go from here? Well, we're going to continue to do what we're doing. We're going to continue to provide services for victims and survivors in Seattle and across the US, with a few other strategic locations where we can make a large impact. We're going to focus on training smaller organizations. Right now we have a wait list of over 100 organizations across the US who have asked for this support. So that's one of our goals. We're working as hard and fast as we can, but our staff as a whole, 40 people. Slow. And then we're going to focus on partnering with other organizations. Because in order to maximize our impact, we have to use organizations all over Seattle and all over the US. And there are so many resources out there. So, for example, Microsoft. There's a group of volunteers at Microsoft who have done amazing things for us in the past. They've created all sorts of tools that we can use. And the one that they're currently working on is so cool. It's an app on the phone called Tyra. And it's basically kind of your Expedia of sex trafficking resources, right? You can look up on your phone what shelters have resources that have availability and what the criteria to meet those resources are. So if any of you have ever worked in social services before, and you've tried to get somebody in the door to a shelter or whatever, you can spend weeks calling to find who has an open bed. And then you find an open bed, and guess what? Your client doesn't qualify for that one, for whatever reason, right? But no, this has all the filters. We've got organizations from all over the US plugging information in real time so that survivors can just put in the needs they have and find the closest thing to them. So right now, with just our soft launch, it's not even full out yet, we've just soft launched it, we have over 50 organizations who have plugged their information into it across 19 states and 61 services. When victims have a way to find a safe place to go within minutes on their phone, it changes the dynamics of the sex trade. It puts the power back in the hands of the victims and survivors. So, it's just one little example of a way to increase efficiency. At the end of the day, our litmus test for what we choose to do is basically, will it contribute to the end of sex trafficking? You deserve to be loved. You survived for a reason. You make the world more beautiful. These are words that we say to every survivor of sex trafficking that we work with. Words that we believe. Words that we want them to know in their heart of hearts. Often these words are so unfathomable that they cannot even physically form the words with their mouths. Because we ask them to. We ask them to repeat it back in an I form. I deserve to be loved. I survived for a reason. I make the world more beautiful. And it's only through positive relationships, as survivors learn to say these words and believe that they are worthy of love and they have value apart from selling their bodies. Only then can they begin to take ownership back of their own lives and take steps to get their basic needs met and become empowered to change their situation. And as each precious individual life changes, we grow the community of survivors who are not only willing to work with law enforcement and government, but are speaking into policy, legislation, pressing charges, being reunited with their families. So again, not only are we treating the symptoms of harm, we're working to eradicate the systems of harm. We know there are no easy answers. People are messy. We're all messy. But we're all in it together. So let's be messy together. Because everyone deserves to be loved, and everyone deserves a life free from exploitation. So what can you do? First and foremost, I'm going to ask you to be a voice. This is something that most people have no idea is an issue in Seattle, much less the magnitude of the issue. Yeah, people drive up and down Aurora and see such a small part of it. They don't realize that it is just as big in Bellevue. So be a voice. Tell people. Spread it to your network. Talk to the people in your church. If you have social media, shout it out on social media. If you don't know what to say, follow us and share our posts. It's not that hard. But be a voice. Obviously, I talked about funding. You know it's a big deal. Did you know that $5 can put somebody into a night of safety? $5 can change a life, can save a life. $5 a month lets us budget around it so that we know we'll have that bed next month for somebody. Obviously, one-time gifts are great too. Not trying to downplay that any. Or you can volunteer and get involved. To be honest, volunteering at rest is a pretty high barrier. It's a sensitive topic. It takes a lot of training to be able to do it well. And I joke that it's more intense than some people's regular full-time jobs. We require an application, 3 references, an interview, a background check, a commitment to volunteer once a week, every week for a year. I realize you've got to really want to do it and be called to it badly in order for that to happen. But we also serve meals at our emergency shelter, at our academy, at our drop-in center, and all of those meals are made and or donated by volunteers. It's an easy way to make a difference. And oh, you guys, food speaks volumes, right? Can I just tell you how excited our clients get when dessert comes in with those meals? It's really cute. So yeah, meals, fundraisers, awareness-raising events, drives for supplies as the cold weather comes, coats, hats, those little hand warmer packs, pass those out on the street like candy. You're welcome to help with that. I mean, not the passing them out part. You don't want to do that. I'll do that. you provide the hand warmers. How's that? All right. I've laid a lot on you guys. I realize that. I could continue to talk a lot more, but I would really like to move to more of a discussion format if you guys are open to it. So, if you have questions, you can shout them out and I will answer them. If you're uncomfortable doing that, I put my phone number right there. You can text it to me so your question's anonymous if you would rather. But what have I not talked about that you want to know? Yeah, and
so when someone comes into arrest, what are you facing with the pimp? I mean, it would seem like if you think that person is their property, you've got problems.
yeah, so he said when somebody comes into arrest, what are we facing with the pimp? So, sex trafficking victims and pimps are as varied as all the kinds of people in the world, right? Some situations, okay, averages. Before COVID, there were a lot of pimps in Seattle who were very well established. So sex trafficking by nature is a transient business, right? You want to get your victim away from all the resources they know, all the people they know, so that they're disoriented and they're not going to seek or find help, right? It's part of the reason that Seattle has such a high rate is we're the intersection of I-5 and I-90. We're a port city. We're a straight shot to Canada. So we do have one of the higher rates of trafficking in the country, and that's because so many people come through here. So that said, there were some fairly established pimps in the area who quite frankly didn't see us as a threat. They were very confident in their ability to find new merchandise. And really, when we got somebody, we were almost doing them a favor because new merchandise brings new business. And what do you do with what you're not excited about using anymore, right? And so they weren't threatened by us. I could walk up and down the street of Aurora all day long and plug people into resources, and it wasn't much of an issue. And then COVID hit, and Aurora got a lot more dangerous. You know, we used to take volunteers out on outreach with us, and with the increase of trafficking, a whole bunch of new pimps came into the game. And they were a little younger, a little less confident, a little more threatened. And so the danger factor went up a lot. So we have to be a lot more careful now than we used to have to be. But even so, they still think that if we help somebody, they'll be able to talk that person into coming back. Whether it is through promises or through threats, they think they can do it. And they probably will a couple of times. It takes a lot to get out of the sex trade, even when you know it's what you want. I mean, think about your own health, right? How many times has a doctor told you 100% the best thing for your health is to go on this diet and to exercise? And you know it's true. And you fall off 5, 6, 7, 10 times before you make a life change, right? same thing happens with people coming out of the life of sex trafficking. We call it the life or the game. So I'm sorry if I use words that don't make sense to you, feel free to call me out. Sorry. Yes.
How many people out on the street actually know about REST? So if you were to take a poll on Aurora Street, how well known are you at this point? Do they know that there's an option?
Yes and no. So again, it's super transient, right? We have a lot of people who come in, are only coming through Seattle for a week, coming from California or from New York often. So we have 3 ways, primary ways, that we spread the word and let people know about us. One is street outreach, and that's walking around in places that we know are common places for the sex trade to happen. One is text outreach. That group of Microsoft volunteers that I told you about a while back created a program for us that allows us to scrape phone numbers off of any online ad for sex. And so we scrape those phone numbers and we send a mass text out from somebody on our staff who has been in the life. And it just says something as simple as, hey, I'm Jackie, I've been in the life, hit me up if you want to talk. We don't know who it's going to. It could be a pimp, it could be a victim, it could be somebody there by choice. We have no idea. We just send it out. Amazingly, God uses that. And so sometimes we have situations. For instance, there was one during COVID who had just come up from California, and she had only been in town less than a week, but she saw this text come through on her phone. She saw it come through on her girlfriend's phone, and she saw it come through on her pimp's phone, and that's the one that piqued her curiosity. And so a few nights later, she was out on Aurora, and her pimp had stepped away, and she called and said, the hotline on the text, and said, hey, I'm by myself with a friend. All we have is the clothes on our backs, and my phone is at 1% battery. What can you do? So Lyft partners with us, and they will get somebody to us for free if we ask them to. And they have a great network of cars that are all over the place, right? And so on that 1%, we were able to get a lift to her, get her to the shelter, and get her plugged into services that night. So a lot of people know about us from those texts. And then word of mouth is also really big. Because when we go out on Aurora, we're not saying, hey, let me save you. We don't want to be a savior. That's not our job. We want to offer you resources that are going to help you be safe. What does that look like? So when I go out there, all I'm saying is, hey, how you doing tonight? Are you safe? Can I offer you pepper spray? Can I offer you a snack? What is it that you need in this moment to feel okay about your surroundings? Usually they'll take us up on the pepper spray or the snack or whatever else we offer. But often they'll also say, you know what, I'm good, but there's a girl over there in that corner who could really use your help. So a lot know about us, a lot still don't. We pass out lighters with our phone number for a hotline on it, because we know the lighters will be kept, will be passed around to other people and won't be taken away by their pimps. What else? Yes.
Last fall, a group of us did a walk on Aurora and prayed at different sites where we had an awareness that some things were going on. And we prayed outside of one particular hotel. And we think it was a proprietor of the hotel. I can't remember, it was the man or the woman that came out and asked us to leave. And I'll never forget, Pastor Matt said it was because basically we were gonna be interrupting their business. And so they were cognizant of what was going on. And so I wonder, where's the accountability in that? I mean, it can't, hotel owners, is there any legal recourse for them allowing, I mean, because there's young girls out there, you know, who are under 18, who are being violated, and so is there any accountability or liability for these hotels or wherever it's happening, you know?
Unfortunately, the challenging thing is that for law enforcement to step in, they have to be able to prove that something is happening that is illegal. They have to be able to prove that the girl is underage, and she's probably going to lie because that's what her pimp has told her to do. And there are multiple reasons that victims listen to their pimps, right? Maybe it's threats. It's not uncommon for a pimp to say, I know where you live. If you don't do what I tell you, I'm going to go get your sister and make her do it. Sometimes it's trauma bonding. That pimp is the first person who has ever acted like he cared. And she gets bonded to him. Listen to me using that gendered language. Go there. I had one client who said, I know he loves me. He brings me Cheetos. Cheetos are my favorite food. That's what love is, right? So, the vast majority of the time, if cops are involved, the victim is going to lie. Vast majority. And they've also been trained that cops are the enemy. Probably from their childhood, probably from their parents. You know? So, no. Really, the only accountability comes when law enforcement does stings and they have somebody posing as underage who is explicit about being underage, and then a buyer comes and tries to purchase that underage victim. Other than that, accountability is tough.
And I don't know if this is still true, but when I was being trained, not to work on the street, but in anti-trafficking, one of the things that I learned, that we learned, and we have an organization that works around the country too, is that if you, say you're on Aurora and you offer a minor help or a safe place, actually legally, you can't do that because you have to be their guardian. Is that correct? That's correct. So it all falls apart really easily because of those rules too.
Yeah, there are a lot of rules that don't help us any. And I know the intention is good, and there have to be rules in place in our country. But a lot of rules are uninformed or come from a time when maybe what was right then is not right now. And, you know, so for instance, something as simple, and this has been changed but hasn't gone into effect yet. Technically, it is still legal in the state of Washington to arrest a 12-year-old girl for selling sex.
Yeah.
Now that's changing. Washington is moving toward the Nordic model. We are trying to get it decriminalized to sell sex and criminalized to buy sex. This is the goal. And we're getting there. Laws are changing. They just haven't all gone into effect yet.
And don't the police kind of acknowledge that they don't go after the minors?
Usually.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah, usually.
Well, I remember last fall, after we did that walk, like within a week or so of that, there were about 3 girls from the Yakima area that were rescued from, I think it was from Aurora. I can't remember. Do you remember, Kenny?
Yes, that's from the area where we were.
and they were all underage girls, and that had been, somebody had like kidnapped them or something and put them into that lifestyle.
Very common. Yeah.
Is there like, can we get some of these cigarette lighters or whatever you're saying? Because I have apartments and I'm constantly going to Home Depot and Lowe's to fix my apartments. And I get approached, I'm a middle-aged man, I'm the target audience, right?
In a
So
muscle
I get
car.
approached constantly, multiple times a week. If I had something I could give them, that I would feel like I'm doing something.
I have some business cards with our hotline number in my bag. Hit me up tonight before you go, and I'll give you a stack of those to take.
Hit me up.
Sorry. Yes.
Have you done any work to resist buyer, those who traffic and women resist trafficking?
Have we done any work with buyers? Is that what you're asking? I love that question. Because that's where it is, right? Because if there were no demand, then this wouldn't be an issue. So absolutely, if we're gonna stop it, demand is the place to stop it. So one of the really great things about Seattle is that we have a pretty good task force of organizations that are all focusing very specifically on different parts so that we can each do our part well. My organization is the one that focuses specifically on client care. But there's another organization, this program has actually moved a couple of times, it's now with Washington Trafficking Prevention. But there is a program that was started by Eli Zucker, who out of Seattle Against Slavery, which then became the Lantern Project, for those of you who know what I'm talking about. Don't worry about it if you don't. And now it's under Washington Trafficking Prevention. This program is, in my opinion, the best in the country for buyers. When a buyer is arrested across the US, he's required to go to what's called a John School. Most places it is an hour of how to put on a condom or something ridiculous. Not worth going to, right? But in Seattle, that's not the case. Because this program was created, that is a 10-week program, and they have to pay a lot of money for it, by the way, which is also good. So they're required by the courts to attend this 10-week program, and it is an accountability program, and it focuses on teaching men to be able to understand and express their emotions. Because the majority of people, when we look at buyers, and we do surveys on buyers, the majority of them are married, have families, say they have a good sex life already. That's not why they're buying. They're buying out of frustration, anger, things that they're not able to cope with. Somehow, they're plugged into this coping mechanism. I have a whole graph on different ways that that happens that I could probably pull up and show you, but you might not want to know. They're plugged into this coping mechanism, and it becomes a habit. And that's how they learn to cope. And so, if we can change that coping mechanism, if we can teach men, and the vast majority of buyers are men, if we can teach men to identify their emotions, to speak about them with other people, to talk to therapists, to find other ways to cope, that's where we see the change. And the majority of the people who go through this program stay with it after they finish the 10 weeks. They stay in accountability programs. And they're asked in an anonymous survey at the end whether they'll buy sex again. And 90% of them say no. So we know it works.
It's kind of the same thing as a court remanding people from domestic violence to go into their court remanded small groups and training. So it's
Yes.
similar,
Yes,
probably even similar information in a lot of ways.
yes, exactly. But yes, so Seattle's doing that well. Not us, but somebody here is doing that well. Let's get that all across the country.
You spoke about partnerships with Microsoft, Lyft. Are there other areas that you're looking to partner with? Other industries? Or?
I mean, what you got?
I'm across the street. University.
SPU is fantastic, by the way. We get a lot of interns from SPU. And we have a lot of volunteers from SPU who kind of start learning from us and then take it into their job field to see how they can. So SPU has been a fantastic partner for us. I personally love hearing ideas that people have about partnering with us. The majority of the best partnerships that we have weren't our ideas. They were somebody who came to us and said, hey, I do this. I bet I could help with this. Let's see what happens. So I'm always open to ideas. And we do have a lot of companies across Seattle who are supporting us either through funding, through technology, through volunteerism, pro bono. All of our medical care that is done on site is done by professional medical volunteers. A lot of our legal care is done pro bono through legal volunteers. So we utilize a lot of partnerships and a lot of volunteers. So yeah, if you have ideas, my card's in the back, my email's on it, my phone's on it. What else, you guys? Should I take? Yes.
We have a question for both you and Camille. How can our Foster and Co. Look for donations? How can we partner? Am I asking the obvious?
No, I love those kinds of questions,
Yeah.
but we have talked about that too. Yeah.
We have a lot of resources that aren't being used, and COVID did really slow us down. But we have a lot of resources available for people who are getting that first apartment. You know, we can provide bedding and towels and food and dishes and ad nauseum. So how do we move forward with what we already have going?
That's huge. We were actually talking about that last month because one of the things that we don't have is storage space. And we do get clients. I mean, when our clients are moving into housing, they literally have nothing but the clothes on their back, and those often aren't what you would think of as clothes. So, you know, they're everything, whatever it is, they need it. And we don't keep it on site. So I think the best thing is just us knowing that we can call when we have a need and seeing what you have that our clients could use. And so I think probably just our advocates having that information on hand and being able to ask is really big. And you guys, one of the really great ways to support, and I don't know how to make this sound good, but it's really hard for us as an organization to always feel guilty asking people for things, you know? Because we do. We feel like we ask too much, or, you know, I can't even tell you. I'll get an ask from our emergency shelter, and I'm looking down my list. What church have I not hit up in the last 3 months? Because I can't call the same people every time, you know? And so a lot of it is just being able to call and ask without feeling bad, and knowing that if you don't have it, you'll say no, and that that's okay, that I'm not gonna like burn that bridge because I asked again.
I guess because I'm thinking, I know that our church has been very generous when we've asked, but I also know that when they know the need is there, they step up. When we ask, our membership steps up beautifully. So if we just kind of know how to go forward, I know we can do more. There's just no doubt in my mind.
I love it.
I know we can.
I love it. Thank you.
And along those lines, you asked for prayer. What are some ways that we can be praying? How do we pray, Lisa?
Yeah. You know, there's so much. It changes every month, but right now I'm going to say be praying for staff. It's been a rough couple of years, and we're tired, and we're understaffed, and we work crazy hours, and it's really emotional work. I wouldn't give it up. I love what I do. I love it more than anything I've ever done. And there are days that I'm over the moon and I wouldn't trade it, but I'm not gonna lie, there are days that you need to scrape me off the floor with a spatula. And I'm not working with clients all the time. I just see them sometimes. Imagine our program staff who, they see the cases that don't go so well a lot of times. And they're tired, and they're weary, and they need love because they pour it out. So be praying that God brings us new staff, that he brings us the people we need. We've had a lot of transition lately. We need more people. Be praying as we expand to support other sites. Because how can we support other people if we're not solid? Right? We need to be able to give it out. So be praying for that, and then always just that God brings the people who need us and who are ready for us and does what he does. Yeah.
Listening to your prayer request brought to my mind a question. Wondering what is your strategy to provide pastoral care for staff?
Yeah, it changes every month. One of the things that REST is really good about is trying to take care of staff, because we do know how important it is. And we do have some churches that partner with us to offer support, to offer care. REST allows us one mental health hour every week that's paid, so that we can use it for, we don't have to say what we're using it for, we can use it for anything, but the heart behind that was to be able to access spiritual counseling or therapy or whatever it is that is needed. We have a few churches who their priority in coming alongside us is to take care of the staff. That they are sending things like notes of encouragement or Starbucks gift card or whatever it is that is going to make us feel like we're not doing this alone. Because that's a lot of it, right? Is we're so focused on what we're doing that even though we have this great community support, sometimes it feels like we're doing it in a bubble, to be honest. And not even that within REST, you know, the people in our emergency shelter don't see the people in our drop-in shelter who don't see the people in our academy. And so they even feel like they're in their own little bubble, right? And it gets lonely, those bubbles. And so something as simple as, somebody from church writing a card that says, hey, just want you to know I'm praying for you. That's huge. That's huge. Yes.
Do you ever give like letters or something like that from churches to the victims or the
Clients, guests, clients, survivors? It depends. A lot depends. So one of the things that we are very, very conscious of is not proselytizing. We know that our clients are all coming out of a power play, a power dynamic. They have been told, however long they've been trafficked, what to think, what to believe, what to wear, when they're allowed to shower, when they're allowed to eat. Everything has been controlled. And we had one client say to us once that before she goes into a social services place to try to access social services, her first thought is, I wonder how Christian I'll have to be today. That is not what we want, ever. And so we never push our beliefs or even really tell them unless we're asked. Then we can speak freely, right? But we make it a very strong point to say, this is what I believe, but I'm willing to help you with whatever questions you have. Whatever belief system you want to explore, I'll help you find answers. And so we will give notes of encouragement, but only in ways that they're not pushing a certain belief system. Anybody else? Y'all, you guys have stuck with me for a long time. Camille's like, wrap it up.
I want to say a prayer for Lisa, but before I do want to share that our missions committee has voted to be a strategic partner of REST in 2023. So we're really excited about that, and I think there'll be many ways for us to partner more with REST, and one of the ways is going to be through giving. So when you give to First Church, we're going to be also supporting REST in their important work, and we're so thankful for that. And it just, yes, listening to Lisa tonight, because this is all in alignment, I believe, with God the Father's heart for those he loves. And so can I just say a prayer for you and for the work of REST? Dear Jesus, we gather here tonight and our hearts break. Our hearts break for those in our city who are being exploited, who are being used and abused. Father, you know them. You know them well, and you call them by name. And Jesus, we desire for them to know how deeply loved they are. And we desire for them to know the truth of who you've created them to be. And so we thank you. We thank you for REST. We thank you for them boldly answering the call to go to places where so many have not gone, to places of darkness, and for shining the light of your love. And we just pray a blessing on their work. We pray for fruitfulness. We pray for provision. We pray for just a multiplication. You've heard the need for staff, for workers. Would you raise the right people up? Would you help those that are even considering this work, Lord Jesus, to be courageous, to step up, Lord. Would you bring people around that can do mighty things in this place? And would you encourage those staff that are growing weary? Would you give them your spirit? Will you fill them with your presence and your, Jesus, just your supernatural ability to face each day? And would you give them a Sabbath rest as well? And I pray especially for my sister Lisa, as I know she's working so very hard. And I pray that you will give her rest, that you will give her a blessing, and that she will know that you are well pleased with her. I thank you, Lord, for what you're going to do through rest. I pray that you will show us more of what you are calling us to do in this area. And I thank you that you deeply love our city, and you love all that live here, and that you've called us to have eyes to see all that are a part of our city in every area, and help us to have the courage to respond and share your love. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you all for gathering. There's a table in the back, I know, with more materials there, and I think Lisa's going to stick around if you have questions. Thank you.